Part 1. Stalag Luft 17. The German guard's boots crunched on the frozen ground as he made his rounds outside the wire. Flight Lieutenant Robert Mac McGregor watched from the window of Hut 14, tracking the guard's movements with the precision of a man who'd been doing it for 18 months. "He's 3 minutes late today," Mac muttered. "Maybe he stopped for coffee," whispered Captain James Fletcher, a Canadian pilot standing beside him. Even Nazis get cold. It was February 1943, and Stalag Luft 17 sat in the bleak countryside of eastern Germany, a sprawling prison camp for Allied airmen shot down over occupied Europe. Mac had been there since August 1941, when his Spitfire took flak over France, and he'd barely made it across the Channel before crash landing in a field. The Germans had found him trying to walk to Dover with a broken ankle. That felt like a lifetime ago. "Gentlemen," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Squadron Leader Hugh Sinclair entering the hut, his RAF uniform threadbare but still worn with dignity. "Meeting in 5 minutes. The usual place." The usual place was the far corner of the hut, where several bunks had been arranged to create a small private space. 20 minutes later, 14 men sat crowded together, speaking in whispers. These were the members of the Escape Committee, pilots, navigators, and bombardiers from Britain, Canada, Australia, and America, united by one obsession: getting out. "The tunnel from Hut 9 collapsed last week," Sinclair began without preamble. "That's the 4th tunnel the Germans have found in 6 months. They're getting better at detection. They have seismograph microphones now, listening for digging." A collective groan filled the space. "So what do we do?" asked Lieutenant Pete Morrison, an American B-17 pilot who'd arrived 3 months earlier. "We can't just sit here for the rest of the war." "No," Mac said quietly. "We can't, which is why we're not going to dig." Everyone turned to stare at him. "Not dig," Fletcher said. "Mac, tunneling is the only way out. The wire is electrified. There are guard towers every 50 yards. They have dogs." "I'm not saying we don't tunnel," Mac interrupted. "I'm saying we don't dig from the huts. We dig from somewhere the Germans would never think to look. Somewhere we can work in plain sight." "And where exactly is that?" Sinclair asked, though Mac could see interest flickering in the older man's eyes. Mac pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and smoothed it on his knee. On it was a crude drawing of a large wooden box, roughly the size of a pommel horse from a gymnasium. "We build a vaulting horse," Mac said. "The Germans let us have exercise equipment in the compound. They think it keeps us docile, gives us something to do besides think about escaping. So we build a horse, set it up in the same spot every day for exercise. The guards get used to seeing it. But here's the trick. It's hollow. Every day we carry men inside it to that spot. While everyone else is vaulting and exercising around it, the men inside dig straight down, then tunnel under the wire." The room fell silent as the men absorbed the audacity of the plan. "That's either brilliant or insane," Fletcher finally said. "Probably both," Mac admitted. "But the tunnel would only need to be about 30 feet long. We'd be digging from inside the wire, from a spot that's only 20 feet from the perimeter. Every other tunnel has started from the huts, which means they're 100 feet or more from freedom. That's why they keep getting discovered. Too much time, too much digging, too much dirt to hide." "The dirt," said Lieutenant Tony Marsh, a navigator who'd become the camp's resident engineer. "That's always the problem. Where do we hide the dirt?" "In the horse itself," Mac replied. "We fill bags inside the hollow compartment, then carry the dirt away with us at the end of each session. We scatter it in the garden plots, mix it with the gray surface soil. The Germans will never know." Sinclair leaned forward, studying the drawing. "How long would it take?" "I estimate 3 months," Tony said, his mind already working through calculations. "Maybe 4. We'd need to dig down at least 5 feet before we start the tunnel proper to get below the microphones. Then 30 feet out, 5 feet back up. We'd be moving about 2 cubic feet of soil per day." "Who goes?" Morrison asked. "If we're doing this, I'm volunteering. We need people who can dig, who can fit in the horse, and who have the nerve to be buried alive for 3 hours every day," Mac said. "I'm going. Fletcher is going. Tony, we need you to engineer this thing." "I'm in," Tony said immediately. "And the 4th man," Sinclair said, "should be someone with language skills. Someone who can pass as a foreign worker if questioned." He paused. I'm nominating Lieutenant David Weber. Everyone nodded. Weber was a British officer with a German mother. He spoke German like a native and could imitate several regional dialects. More importantly, he was small enough to fit in the cramped confines of the vaulting horse. Then we're agreed, Mac said. We start building tomorrow. Part 2. The Dig. The vaulting horse took 3 weeks to construct. Tony scrounged wood from every source imaginable: bed slats, floorboards, even pieces of packing crates from Red Cross parcels. The camp's resident carpenter, a cheerful Australian named Bruce Kelly, helped assemble it under the guise of improving camp morale through athletic equipment. The Germans approved the project. The commandant, Oberst Klaus Richter, was a Luftwaffe officer who'd flown in the First World War. He treated his prisoners with a grudging respect, believing in the concept of honorable warfare between fellow airmen. He saw the vaulting horse as a positive development. He would later call it the greatest embarrassment of his career. On March 15th, they placed the horse in the exercise yard for the first time. Mack, Fletcher, and Weber climbed inside the hollow compartment before dawn, cramming themselves into a space barely large enough for 3 men. Tony and a dozen others then lifted the horse, which now weighed close to 300 pounds with the men inside, and carried it to the designated spot, grunting and straining to make the effort look convincing. Jesus, Fletcher whispered in the darkness. I can barely breathe in here. Get used to it, Mac whispered back. We're going to be doing this every day for months. Above them, they heard the morning roll call, the German guards counting prisoners. Then came the sound of men gathering for exercise. Feet thudded on the ground as prisoners began vaulting over the horse, their bodies creating a rhythmic boom, boom, boom that masked any sound the diggers might make. Now, Mac breathed, they'd smuggled in small tools, a trowel, a modified tin can for scooping, a small knife. They worked in the dark, their hands finding the marks they'd made on the wooden floor. Weber pried up a panel, revealing the cold German earth beneath. Mac began to dig. The soil was hard, half frozen despite the arrival of spring. His hands cramped. Sweat poured down his face despite the cold. Above him, he could hear Lieutenant Morrison leading the exercise session, his voice loud and cheerful. Come on, lads. Knees up. You want to be fit when we're liberated, don't you? Mac smiled grimly and kept digging. After an hour, his hands were raw and bleeding. They'd removed maybe half a cubic foot of soil, stuffing it into bags made from trouser legs. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough at this rate. But they'd started. That was something. When the exercise session ended, Tony and the others lifted the horse, now even heavier with the added weight of soil bags, and carried it back to the storage shed. Mac, Fletcher, and Weber climbed out, stretching their cramped muscles. Well? Sinclair asked quietly. It works, Mac said. It's going to be hell, but it works. They dug every day for the next 4 months. Some days they managed 2 cubic feet of soil. Some days, less than 1. They dug through spring rains that turned the earth to mud. They dug through a week when Tony had dysentery and Weber had to take double shifts. They dug through the day when the commandant decided to inspect the exercise equipment and stood 3 feet from the horse while men worked frantically in the tunnel below, certain they'd be discovered. But they weren't. The tunnel grew, 5 feet down, then level, then forward under the wire. They shored up the walls with bed slats. They created an air pump from a kit bag and some tubing. The man at the face of the tunnel would dig while lying flat, pushing the soil back to the next man, who pushed it to the next until it reached the shaft and could be hauled up in bags. It was exhausting, terrifying, claustrophobic work. Fletcher developed a fear of enclosed spaces and had to be replaced by Morrison. Weber cut his hand badly on a rock and dug for 2 weeks with an infected wound, afraid to visit the camp doctor and raise suspicions. But by July 1943, they'd done it. The tunnel extended 32 feet, emerging in a small drainage ditch beyond the wire, hidden by overgrown weeds. We're out, Max said one evening, his voice thick with emotion. We're actually out. Part 3. The Escape. They planned to go on July 29th, a Thursday night when the guard rotation changed and there was a brief gap in surveillance. The camp had received news that week. The Allies had invaded Sicily. The war was turning. But that didn't mean they could wait. Prisoners were being transferred east to camps deeper in Germany. If they didn't go soon, they might never get another chance. 4 men would attempt the escape: Mack, Weber, Morrison, and a new addition, a young pilot named Eddie Griffin, who spoke fluent French and had contacts in the resistance. The day of the escape, they went through the routine one last time. The horse was carried out, placed over the tunnel entrance. But this time, the men inside carried civilian clothes, forged identity papers, maps, compasses, and a small amount of German currency acquired through black market trading. At 10 p.m., when darkness had fallen, they slipped into the tunnel one last time. Mack went first, crawling through the narrow passage. His breath came in short gasps. The walls pressed in on him. For a moment, panic clawed at his chest. What if it collapsed now, after everything? He'd be buried alive, suffocated in German soil, just yards from freedom. He forced the thoughts away and kept moving. The tunnel seemed longer at night, endless. His hands touched wet earth, splintered wood, smooth stones. Then, finally, he felt cool air on his face. He'd reached the exit. Mack pushed aside the carefully arranged covering of dirt and weeds and pulled himself up into the drainage ditch. Above him, stars filled the sky. He'd been a prisoner for almost 2 years, and he'd forgotten how beautiful the night could be. Weber emerged next, then Morrison, then Griffin. They lay in the ditch for 10 minutes, listening. A guard tower light swept across the compound, but it didn't reach them. In the distance, a dog barked. "Right," Mack whispered. "Weber and I head east, toward the Oder River. Morrison, you and Griffin go west. Try for the Dutch border. We split up, we double our chances." They shook hands quickly, then separated into the darkness. Mack and Weber walked for 6 hours that first night, staying in fields and forests, avoiding roads. By dawn, they were 12 miles from the camp. They hid in a barn, sleeping in shifts, listening to the sounds of a German farm coming to life around them. The next night, they walked 15 miles. The night after, 20. Weber's German got them through one checkpoint, where he claimed they were factory workers heading to a new assignment in Berlin. His papers, forged in the camp by a talented forger named Johnny, passed inspection. On the fourth night, as they approached the Oder River, they heard the sound of motorcycles behind them. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "Dogs bayed! Run!" Weber shouted. They ran through a wheat field, the stalks whipping at their faces. The motorcycles grew louder. Mack's lungs burned. His legs, weakened by 2 years of poor rations, threatened to give out. Then Weber grabbed his arm and pulled him sideways toward a small creek. They plunged into the water, submerging themselves in the icy current, breathing through reeds as the search party passed within yards of their hiding spot. When silence returned, they crawled out and kept moving. It took them 3 weeks to reach the Oder River. 3 weeks of walking at night, hiding during the day, scrounging food from fields and abandoned buildings. They encountered a Polish resistance cell that gave them bread and directions. They spent 2 days hiding in a bombed-out church while German troops conducted a manhunt for saboteurs. But they made it. On August 19, 1943, they reached the river. A resistance contact provided a boat, barely more than a leaky rowboat, and directions to the Soviet lines on the far side. They crossed that night, paddling through the darkness while artillery rumbled in the distance. Twice, German patrol boats passed close enough that Mack could see the faces of the crews, but somehow they remained unseen. At dawn, they reached the eastern shore. Soviet soldiers found them an hour later, half dead from exhaustion and exposure. "British?" one of the soldiers asked in broken English. "RAF," Mack croaked. "Prisoners, escaped." The soldier grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. "You are safe now, Tovarish. Welcome to Mother Russia." Epilogue: Mack and Weber spent 2 months with the Soviets before being evacuated through Persia to Egypt, then finally home to England. They arrived in London on October 22, 1943, nearly 3 months after their escape. Morrison and Griffin had also made it. They'd reached the Dutch border, connected with the resistance, and been smuggled through Belgium and France to Spain. All 4 men survived the war. The Wooden Horse Tunnel remained undiscovered for another 3 weeks after the escape. When the Germans finally found it, Oberst Richter stood at the tunnel entrance for a long time, staring at the vaulting horse, understanding how thoroughly he'd been deceived. "Ingenious," he reportedly said. "Absolutely ingenious." 18 other prisoners used the tunnel before it was discovered, all successfully escaping the camp. 3 were recaptured. 15 made it to Allied or neutral territory. After the war, Mack returned to Scotland, married his childhood sweetheart, and became a schoolteacher. He rarely spoke about his time as a POW, though he kept a small wooden carving of a vaulting horse on his desk until the day he died. Tony Marsh became an engineer and helped rebuild bomb-damaged cities across England. Weber wrote a book about the escape that became a bestseller and was adapted into a film. And every year on July 29th, the 4 escapees would meet at a pub in London, raise a glass, and toast to freedom, friendship, and a wooden horse that carried them to liberty. The end.